Wise Way Learning presents the lecture number 39 to 42, under Section 7. This is a complete project management free course from beginner to project manager with 19 sections of 100 lectures. Welcome to the course. Section 7 and lectures 39 to 42, the planning phase, expectations, assumptions, and risks. This section includes the lectures such as Lecture 39 What is the planning expectations management? Lecture 40 How to control assumptions? Lecture 41 What is the planning risk management? Lecture 42 How to build a risk log?
Section 7 and lecture number 39, What is the planning expectations management?
So, we've covered the obvious parts of a project, the time, scope, and cost. Now we're going to look at the non-obvious parts of the project. Claude Debussy and Mozart are quoted as saying that music is the silence between the notes. And in many ways, a project is as much the things that aren't seen as the things that are. While a truly great musician will be aware of the gaps between the notes, a fantastic project manager will have an ear for the expectations, assumptions, and risks surrounding a project. So let's start this lesson by explaining how to deal with multiple stakeholders' expectations of a project. Following that, we will do the same for assumptions. After the project manager has cleared up these areas, risks become more apparent. So that is when we will go through the process of risk assessment and, of course, risk prevention and response. Okay, do you remember when we discussed talking with stakeholders about their expectations from the project? Sure you do. Well, as a project manager, it's important to be able to understand human nature and psychology. A project involves a lot of people, and if expectations are not the same across the board, some of the people involved will be disappointed that the project didn't meet their expectations. An expectation is the psychological picture we create in our heads for a future event. And depending on the situation, it can be easy to set expectations and predict outcomes. For example, you order a taxi and expect it to arrive in 5 to 10 minutes. You can only really be disappointed if the taxi driver fails their task and is late. However, if you give a person more room for imagination, then the chances of disappointment may be higher. Now imagine that the taxi you ordered is supposed to take you to a school reunion, which you are excited for because you expect to rekindle an old flame. Sam. They will be just as funny and beautiful as they were 15 years ago. You expect they will fall head over heels for you and it will be just like it was when you were kids. Sam, however, expects everyone to be super thrilled about their recent marriage proposal. The reunion may be a success for Sam, but certainly not for you. When given more room for interpretation, we are likely to fill our imagination with our own subjective views and desires. And the more people there are imagining how something could end up, the more chance there is that expectations will vary. If a project reaches its end, after all the time, money, and effort has been invested, and stakeholders, especially the client of the project, reveal their expectations to be something completely different, the project has automatically failed. This is why the project manager must have a clear idea of the project from the beginning, and it's essential they have all the stakeholders on the same page. Now, the process of getting everyone on the same page is done mostly when defining the scope, during workshops, and when meeting with stakeholders. The project manager must be able to clearly communicate their expectations and hold sessions in a way that encourage stakeholders to share their expectations in order to identify any gaps. Some example questions the project manager could ask are: how do you think the final product of the project will be useful to the organization? Or, do you believe something can be added to significantly improve the result? Or even, do you agree with the way the scope is described in the project documents? Plus many others, because the more thorough, the better. Now, the project manager's job of leveling everyone's expectations does not stop there. Not only must the project manager keep all stakeholders up to date during the various meetings carried out through the scope phase, but they must also keep in constant communication for the whole project as any changes occur. The whole idea behind keeping everyone in the loop, constantly, is to eliminate any opportunities for the stakeholders' imagination to run wild. Awesome. Now that covers expectations. Next lesson, we'll discuss how to make assumptions in the safest way. See you there.
Section 7 and lecture number 40. How to control assumptions.
As well as expectations, projects also involve plenty of assumptions. An assumption is when something is believed to be true when there's no definite proof. While the planning process aims to clarify all areas of the project, we must assume that there are areas that we cannot be 100% certain of. For example, we cannot be 100% sure that all team members will be as productive as they usually are, but we have to assume they will. Of course, a project manager will be more certain of their assumption if they have worked with the team before, but it is still an assumption. The more past data a project manager has, the safer their assumptions will be. Imagine Lamborghini needs to hire a certain number of mechanics to deal with any problems the show cars may have. You, as the project manager, could look at previous data where a similarly trained mechanic from a previous showroom project was able to properly care for 5 cars. You plan to have 20 cars in your showroom. Therefore, you can assume you will need to hire 4 mechanics. While there is still a level of uncertainty, it is a lot less than if you had no previous data. Of course, estimations can be made by other team members and experts in those areas, in which case your job as project manager is to review and understand the calculations and assumptions made. You need to know how much uncertainty has been addressed, how much buffer is needed, and how much of the work is exposed to events that can impact it in a negative way. These events are, of course, risks, the topic of our next lesson, and that is where we'll see you.
Section 7 and lecture number 41. What is the planning risk management?
When Darth Vader was a project manager for the Death Star, he did a pretty good job. The time, scope, and cost for a project such as this must have been astronomical. The vessel was a pinnacle of engineering, and Mr. Vader assumed he had thought of everything. No way could any starship, no matter how large, even make a dent in a superweapon that can blow up planets. So Mr. Vader put his feet up on his favorite armchair and prepared to reap the rewards of galactic domination. However, old Darthy didn't assume that some tiny little X-Wings could attack the planet-sized Death Star and blow it up. How wrong he was. This goes to show that proper risk management can not only make a project more efficient by eliminating delays, it can even save a project from total failure. Darth Vader was perhaps a little overconfident and narrow-minded by not putting a cover on the thermal exhaust port, or maybe he was just over budget. For future generations, project managers looking to conquer the universe can avoid this problem by following this 3-step process. The first step is to identify the risks. Throughout the planning phase, the project manager will list all the risks they encounter in a risk log. They must continually add to this through all stakeholder meetings and workshops. Of course, it's not a straightforward process. The information is not just sitting there with a badge saying risks. They must use their skills, knowledge, intuition, and team to uncover them. The risk log will look something like this. Now, once the risks have been identified, the next step is to analyze them. We can do this by reviewing 2 dimensions. How bad can it get if the event happens? And how likely is it that the event actually happens? Or in other words, the severity of the consequences and the probability of occurrence. The severity refers to the impact the event would have on the scope, budget, or timeline, and to what degree the project activities are exposed to such an event. We record the severity with a scale. A simple one would be high, medium, and low, but could be translated to something as specific as expected delays or financial losses. The probability of occurrence is how likely an event will occur. Again, A simple scale of high, medium or low probability can be used, or, depending on the project, perhaps it could be measured by percentage. Obviously 100% would no longer make it a risk, rather something that is certain and would make it an actual issue. Now, let's fill in some potential risks with our Lamborghini project. Excellent. Looking good. But what are you going to do with this information, project manager? See you next lesson, where we'll look at how to handle these risks together.
Section 7 and lecture number 42, How to build a risk log.
Now is the time to prepare for action. You can do two things when faced with a risk. Change something in advance to eliminate or lessen the risk, say doing construction in the summer months rather than the winter months, for example, or create a plan B in case the risk becomes reality. The former is called mitigation and the latter, contingency. The options you have when it comes to mitigation are firstly, to eliminate the risk. For example, you have planned to have big modern letters which light up all spectacular to be put on the top of your showroom. The risk is that this area is prone to strong winds during some seasons, and there is a risk of letters falling. To eliminate this risk completely, you can plan to have them attached to the facade or have printed letters instead. And of course, insurance will cover the financial risks of any damage if you choose to keep the original lettering. If eliminating the risk is not possible, or not worth the extra costs, then you can aim to reduce the severity. For example, if it's not feasible to delay construction during the autumn and winter months, then you can prepare for damage control by training your team to work in bad conditions and store equipment that could be damaged during periods of bad weather. If you are diligent, you can prevent major costs and delays without having to stop construction completely. On top of that, you can reduce the probability of occurrence. If you have noticed low motivation from a member of your team and their low productivity risks causing delays, then you can be proactive in motivating them by identifying any problems they may have or by incentivizing the work. And if during the project you find these methods have not worked, you can let the team member go or employ an extra pair of hands. Now, as you can probably guess, these methods can be combined and personalized as required by the project. Great. So now let's talk about contingency planning. Unless you have eliminated a risk completely, then a plan B is always a good idea. Document what you and the team need to do to limit the damage from an event and record it in the risk log. For example, take the 3D visualization effects example from our log. The technology is designed to project what the cars would look like in different colors and variations. If it's not ready when the showroom opens, we can still show them the old-fashioned way with booklets and displays. It's not ideal, but it is a better outcome than having no backup plan whatsoever. So view your risk log as a living document that must be constantly updated. Risks can rear their head at any point, and previously identified risks can evolve. A good project manager will keep updating their risk log. As we mentioned, risks, as well as many other areas of the project planning, are often identified through communication with stakeholders. So how about we take some time to discuss how a project manager communicates with everyone involved in the project?